right.
And the recording tells me it's going to start soon.
It started, yeah.
Okay, very good.
All right, welcome everyone to the Ecma International Technical Committee 54, Technical Group 2 for the Pearl standardization. As we start, I remind everyone that this call is subject to the Ecma TC54 Code of Conduct, which is the same as usual, and you are expected to abide by this Code of Conduct. And we'll start with a quick roll call. We have today Steve Springett, Matt Rukowski, John Horan, and myself joining. Maybe we'll get more later on. And let's take the agenda. Steve, is there something you want to bring up?
I don't have any updates from TC54 at the moment. I do believe that based on where we are with the specification, I think I might have some questions later. The only thing that is outstanding on my side that is applicable to this group, but not necessarily the responsibility of this group, is I am waiting for a pull request from Aki over in TC39 to be merged so that our PDF documentation generation will be the valid Ecma docs. But that's the only thing I'm currently blocked on.
Okay. Matt, something you want to bring up as a topic to the agenda?
Nothing for me today.
John?
Nothing for me, Philippe. Thank you.
Okay. Yeah. And on my side, I'd like to discuss a bit the progress on the spec. So we can start with that. There's nothing to bring up more on your side, Stephen. I mean, the statement you've made was all right. There's nothing further to discuss there on your side.
No, I'm just looking forward to the specification update.
Yeah. So first thing, I mean, I've already brought it up last week during the TC54 general meeting, but there was this open source conference in Brussels 2 weeks ago called FOSDEM, and it was interesting because there was a lot of thing about package URL in many places. You saw, I could see it flashing in several slides during the bomb dev room and other places also. I saw it showed up in presentation on open source funding and sustaining. So that was really, really interesting. A lot of good vibes also around Cyclone. Oops, and somebody is joining. Hey, Salve. Do you want to bring anything to the agenda, Salve? Any question you want to bring? Oh, you're muted. And by the way, just a reminder that the call is recorded, but you're muted at the moment, so. Okay, you're still muted, so I'll carry forward. So that was just quick feedback around FOSDEM. It was interesting to meet also many folks from the community like Jan Kovalec, Ole, and Salve, and many others. Now, on the progress and work on the spec specifically, I feel at the moment we're doing 1.5 steps forward and 1 step back, which means we are progressing. Small half step, but we are progressing, which is a good thing. We've merged a PR after a bunch of review, John and I, to clarify the the scheme. So that's not super ambitious. So we all agree now it's PKG, it's 3 letters, it's followed by a colon, and there's no controversy about that in the coding. But we also had a series since we last met of a community meeting with contributions of folks from Red Hat in particular that have been very helpful. Martin Propik in particular has been helping. So he and Jan are specifically helping on the review and trying to bring together the synthesis and the proposal for version and qualifiers. And the more we dig, the more weird stuff show up in the details, of course. And that's how I realize how cross I am about drafting a spec that has no dark corner. It's terribly small and terribly confusing at times. For instance, right now there's something I don't know how to resolve, which is should a column inside the name be encoded or not? The spec is not entirely clear. And as a result, you have 2/3 of the tools which behave a certain way and 1/3 another way. I actually like very much this approach from this guy called Matt Donoghue, originally with Phylum, that's been acquired by Veracode. And it's been very helpful to actually run this test to validate certain features of the spec on all the tools at once. So I'm gonna see whether we can have something which would be a way to run all the tools at once. And there are small libraries to make sure that as we clarify the spec, there's 2 outcomes. One, which will be ideal, the majority of the tools agree, and there's very few things to adjust in 1 or 2 of the parsers. But then we can directly go and work with the maintainers of these parsers to make sure they're consistent. Or there's more serious changes, I hope not, in which case we can also reach out to each of the maintainers of these tools to clarify the thing.
The thing with the colon doesn't the spec already outline that for us? I mean, not the Perl spec, but like the URL or URI spec. Colon is a reserved character, and I believe should not be encoded except for the query string. If it appears in the query string, I believe it is encoded.
Yeah. But there's some ambiguities because obviously tools authors came with different interpretations. So, but that's going to be resolved in the next couple of days. I'm just bringing it up because that's actually a weird problem, which is it's just 1 character. It's seldom used in a name or namespace of a package, if ever. Still want to make sure we're consistent there.
Right, but Perl, like the other Perl,
Yes.
They use that.
Oh, terrible. So we're gonna just ban
Sometimes 2 in a row.
we're gonna ban Perl from Perl. Oh, sorry, Salve, you are here. Remember, everything is recorded and is going to be published online. But yeah, so for the record for everyone, Salve represents the CPAN community, which is the comprehensive Perl archive network, Perl with an E and not a U. So that was a gentle, friendly stab at Perl, the language.
Yeah. Can you guys hear me now?
Yes.
Awesome. Okay. So I feel that this kind of confusion we should make more explicit and humorous if we're going to continue with it. Because there's already enough difficulty to understand that when you say Perl, it's actually a PURL and not PERL. It sounds the same to me. So This is too difficult.
So
Maybe we should have a sign that we show up, or an icon that we can click on. That
Yeah.
shows.
So just highlighting there. So other than that, we're doing decent progress there. What else to say? So the fact to have these community calls on Wednesday morning Pacific time, late CT and somewhat in the afternoon for Eastern time, is actually a very positive thing. So there's not much to say there, just that we're doing progress, we're merging PRs. There's also work we're doing on the side of the work on the spec, which is to also cater to all the other pending PRs and issues as we go. The more I look at all the pull requests on types, which we said would explicitly not be part of the core spec, the more I see a lot of variations in the language being used, and the more your idea, Steve, to actually specify a mini schema, which is, hey, this is the elements and fields you put in the definition of a Perl time. That's it. Makes 100% sense. So we're going to tackle that before the end of the month. I think it really makes sense. It's useful. It's gonna help a lot, avoiding funky stuff in types definition.
Got it. No, that's amazing.
Yeah. Yeah. The thing is that type definition, for instance, we're trying to stay away from too many specifics. As an example, there's a recent request to have that's support for Bazel modules. So Bazel server, I'm pasting the link there, and John, feel free to add it to the notes too. It's pull request 317. Bazel is a build tool originally created by Google, and there's a new thing called Bazel modules, which are packages for this build tool. So you have pre-built recipes or modules, as they call them, and there's a lot of small things that need to be looked at. For instance, I noticed that one of the one of the suggestion was to keep a reference to the specific syntax they use for module versions, and they have a very specific set which says, hey, it's a Semver-like type of versioning, and here are our rules. And I don't think it has anything to do in the spec here, even a type definition. Just saying, the version is the Bazel module version is enough, and that makes for a clearer definition and simpler thing. So just so you guys get a bit of a feel, it's not part of the Ecma standard proper, but it highlights the need to have the structured format and mini schema for this type definition, probably as part of the spec, because then it leaves much less opportunity for artistic interpretations of what should be in the type definition. The bulk of it is about mapping a name of some construct in an ecosystem to what we use in Perl.
Hey, Philippe.
Yes.
I don't know how visible it is, but I've had my hand raised, waiting for a pause.
Oh, sorry.
So
maybe
I lied earlier. I do have something to discuss today. If there's a pause,
you want to pause a second for recording?
No. I mean, pause in the agenda, what that you had going.
Yeah. That's okay. That's okay.
I want to talk about this on the record. Absolutely.
Yeah.
So this just happened just 2 days ago, and I guess I was multitasking a little bit, so I didn't think of it when you asked me if I had an agenda item. So apologies. And again, I'll plead ignorance if this has been discussed before or is being discussed in an issue. But like I said, I've said this sort of, I've successfully sold Cyclone and use of Perl. I've been trying to beat that people for years in IBM. And I think I've been too successful because the powers that be in IBM are getting upset with our tool vendors who are creating bills and materials, and we're getting invalid values in the Perl field.
Oh yeah.
And so they're just putting URLs in there. The one example that I was looking at with them. And here's the problem. The problem is, and I think that this does need to be solved or at least discussed to have a best practice or something, is for internal packages. So, I'll just say we use GitHub Enterprise and we still use internal systems that we maintain internal packages, but our customers, and we want to report those in our bills of materials, and we do. But in lack of guidance, these tools are basically just saying, oh, here's the URL that we grabbed it from GitHub Enterprise. And there is a syntax that I reviewed with this person in our group for GitHub, but not for GitHub Enterprise. So we took a stab at what it might be, but we have not submitted a pull request. But we intend to go back to the tooling vendor to get them to do something more conformant to Perl.
So completely.
Was this on so GitHub Enterprise? Was this using GitHub packages, or was this like in Go, just using GitHub like repositories?
Not using GitHub packages, just using repositories.
Okay. All right. Yep.
So I think this is a general problem. If if we're being sincere and we want to, this is not just about the public package ecosystem.
Completely. I think there's to your point, Mike, there's a couple of things there. First, come on. Generally speaking, private packages. Yes, we need to come with proper guidance there.
IBM needs to be held to task that this is a package that we publish and we reuse internally, and it's versioned and all these things. And but so
example. So at the scale of a company like IBM, you're large enough that you're almost an ecosystem of your own internally, and there may be packages which are consumed across product teams.
IBM, I'm told, is the largest user of GitHub Enterprise by far of any company in the world.
So I think they're so probably getting something like GitHub Enterprise maybe as a specific type could make sense. Or I'm assuming these GitHub Enterprise instances, if they're not hosted at GitHub but they're private at your company, would each have some kind of URL to distinguish them. So that could be an alternative.
Oh yeah. So I mean, I'm glad to hear you say that, and happy to help, and with further discussions and comment and stuff like that. So the two things we looked at specifically were, of course, the GitHub representation, and we also looked at the what we use for the registry that we have for CycloneDX to register. That we use for properties. So we looked at two approaches, saying there's this keyword internal, so that there could be like an internal spec where you then augment that with whatever, or you could go a step further and you could actually allow us to register a corporate name as the scheme, as part of the initial schema, IBM, like we do for things like that. So then we'd love to have, but things like a large ecosystem like GitHub Enterprise or SVN or things like that, there should be a way to represent internal things in generic way, as well as maybe allow companies to represent some proprietary way of identifying packages.
So definitely there's that. There's also the work that was initiated by Steve to support Suede in Perl, which could be an alternative. And there's also a small elephant in the room, which is when is a Perl private, or when is a private Perl, if it's being leaked to the outside, what happens to it? Which is an interesting issue because it's an area that's actually.
Well, I mean, I think that can be taken care. I mean, first of all, you know, IBM puts disclaimers and legal notices in these things that would have these things in them. Or if we're going to create a general public one, we'll wipe them from the bill of materials.
Yeah, yeah.
So you're under legal obligations or whatever. But we don't care. It's just an ID, and as long as it's just clearly demarked IBM or internal, then you should then any obligations or any concerns should be diminished.
So, GitHub Enterprise uses the same kind of hierarchy as, github.com in terms of like organizations or individuals and then repos within those things. We have the repo_URL reserved qualifier.
Yeah.
We might want to think about, as a easy solution that would be applicable to everything, a reserved value for that qualifier. We could call it repo_URL private or something along those lines, because I don't see a lot of organizations providing the URL to like their internal GitHub Enterprise. That's likely not going to happen. But if you could say that repo_URL, so that you are saying first and foremost that this is not github.com, this is something else, and I'm not telling you what that other thing is.
Yeah, we looked at other package, schemes for other packages, and a lot of times when there's, I think I was like, if you look at Debian or whatever, where there's multiple URLs, what they do is they have like a keyword that indicates and then you shift the path, you shift the URL, the host name one thing over, and that's kind of what the approach we're looking at. But I think that we should recognize explicitly large providers like GitHub Enterprise, and I think the approach the keyword we used was internal for our own stuff, so maybe not just repo, but just internal or something, because you can't guarantee it's a repository. I think that, again, acknowledging GitHub or things that have specific API sets or CLIs or protocols you can interact with curl, it's important to preserve that identity or that connection, that association, or the association is probably a better word.
No, completely makes sense. So the interesting thing here is that just the other day there was a bug filed on the package URL Python library where someone says, hey, I'd like to have a way to provide an alternative registry as a default for NPM, PyPI, Java. I have my own internal repos. I want to resolve a URL or to a Perl or a Perl to URL using these internal repositories as a default in this library.
Well, wow, that brings up another topic.
Yeah.
Thanks for that. So, I mean, I've long advised IBM partners and customers, and it's just good practice. I know it's being used widely for Java. People maintaining their own, package registries. So you're not, you might look and feel like a Java registry, but when you're doing your imports in your code, you're really going to an internal registry, and you really want to represent that internal registry and the build of the package there. Even on the face value, it looks like the public one. So you don't want a scanner necessarily to assume it's the public one, because the internal one might have slightly different code.
Yeah. Well, at least it's going to be, in any case, the general assumption is that it should be a version that's been vetted and hopefully carefully mirrored in the private repo. Or if anything, if it's a mirror, at the minimum, you're guaranteed that the version is not mutating behind your back from an outside source, which is unlikely, but still it's good practice. So
I think it goes back, it's like, where did you really want to represent where you pulled the package from?
Yeah. So, but the question is here, in this case, it's more, there's a use case, which is I have internal packages with a a private registry, in this case, your GitHub enterprise repositories, but it's not meant to ever go outside. This other use case is a bit like the almost the mirror image, which is I have public pearls, but I really want them to be resolved to my internal mirrors and private registries, which could be, I don't know, Sonatype Nexus, JFrog Artifactory, or Pulp if you use Red Hat technology, for instance.
Yeah,
or,
here's an interesting thought. Maybe there, like you were talking about mini schemas. Maybe there's a mini schema where you could have like an internal Perl and have some schema where you'd have a query string or something that said, well, here's a link to another Perl that shows what this one was linked to or derived from or whatever, or represents publicly. Here's our internal version, is what we use. And it should be, have some query parameter that says, well, here's an ID for another Perl or something that for the corresponding public package, if you will.
Yeah.
So one of the things that my employer does is, I guess, interesting. We use, and I think a lot of organizations do something similar. We do not use the repo URL, even though we cannot access public repositories from our builds, right? We have our own internal Artifactory or Nexus repos and stuff. But when we represent the Perl, we're not actually specifying the repo URL because as an organization, we're only using Perl for identity and not the location aspect.
Yeah.
So that's like I was describing with the Java stuff where you proxy your stuff to an internal server. Exactly.
Okay.
Right.
So, just to make sure we keep track of this, I think so. The private package and GitHub Enterprise, if we don't have an issue there on the Perl spec repo, Matt, if you care to create one, that would be awesome. If not, I'll take care of that.
Yeah, please do so on my behalf.
Okay, I will, and I'll tag you then on the issue in question.
Thank you.
On the topic of wrong pearls, so wrong pearl is a major problem. There's these weekly calls or bi-weekly calls from CISA on SBOMs, and there's a report that's flying around for review with certain use case. And the assumption in that report is certain use case for SBOMs, right? And the assumption in that report is that going in this use case, SBOMs are accurate and contain an accurate representation of what software is in that. And the problem is that of course if you start from the premise that SBOMs are accurate, your use case will be working okay. The reality is that right now it's difficult because of disparity of how tools go and detect things to get any kind of accuracy. And if you have no accuracy, good luck with any kind of automation downstream. And I feel for the pain you have when you're receiving SBOM from vendors or partners or constituents in your ecosystem. Here, talking about ecosystem as your business ecosystem.
Oh yeah, well, that's exactly how this problem I described entered my radar, is because they try to use my validation tool to validate the Perl string, and it doesn't validate. And so this is appropriate because Steve and I were talking about like the adding the patent schema to CycloneDX, and I said, please don't make this a string to make these IDs and things strings. So the question is, we need to figure out how we slowly say we add constraints and conformance to the Perl fields and bills of materials. I
think we have a path forward for that, and I think we've got the pieces in place already. Philippe said earlier that he was going to start working on the Perl type schema definition sometime this month. Now, because we're not pushed for that timeline for mid-year GA, we can take our time a little bit. get that schema flushed out within the next couple of months, and in the Ecma documentation where it says conformance, you ensure that your Perl actually validates to a known Perl type.
Yeah. And so very specifically, yes, very
Well,
specifically.
or he's going to turn it on, go from string to something, and then the question is, how mean do we want
No,
to? Yeah.
well,
When do we
no,
turn
no,
this-
I mean,
turn it on, go from string to the more, to something that's going to fail every place.
So
well, it's not going to
Matt,
fail. It's just that tools will need to become a little bit more mature and put validations on their own pearls.
Well, I'm talking. Well, the problem is the validate. Anything that does validation, that's my tool. It's going to start failing everything, and then I'm going to get called from 2,000 products saying, "Why are you failing my pearls?" That's being generated by SonarQube or something. So
yeah, and that's a real problem. So let me go a bit further. I'm pasting here the link, which I think is the tool you refer to, which is the CycloneDX SBOM utility, right?
yes, and what we do is we maintain what we call, I guess you would view them, strict IBM variants of these things. So basically we actually enforce additional controls on these things. Yeah.
So I'm pasting a second link, which is just because that's the only public information I have available. It's a small project that we're receiving a bit of funding for on aboutcode.org from this Dutch non-profit operation, which is called NLNet. And the intent there is to build a tight and evergreen data set provided as an automaton that you can include in your Go library, in the Rust library, in the Python library. We're going to work in these three languages for a start, and probably Java afterwards. So you can validate if this pearls is actually just something that's exists in the wild by literally looking into the set of all known pearls, which is something that you can also probably in your use case internally enhance with maybe additional conventions you use internally. The whole point being that you want literally 3 levels of validation. You want a first level, which is a syntax. Is this syntax correct? Does it make sense? Is it?
Well, it boils down to whatever constraints you design into the JSON schema. That's all it boils down to. The problem is if CycloneDX publishes like 1.7 Cyclone, and it suddenly has this, constraint syntax with regex, then I have to adopt that. That's canonical. That's a canonical spec. And that's the canonical schema. So I'll start failing immediately anyway.
Yeah. So now I'm separating this validation of the existence of Perl from the problem of whether that should be something enforced in the JSON schema. It's going to be difficult to enforce that in the JSON schema because it is going to be maybe a data set that's a couple of megabytes or tens of megabytes big, because it literally enumerates all the known pearls.
But I think that the general structure is still it will still boil down to a regex.
No, well,
not trying to
that it's going to boil down to an automaton. So yes, but that would be
there's a DNF grammar that describes the syntax, so you're going to be able to create a regex for it. So
yeah, so there's a first level, that's the syntax. The second level is having a data set you can query, literally do existence check for the Perl, and the third level is to do an online check to see, for instance, if I have this Maven Perl.
Yeah, I agree.
Does it exist upstream?
I'm saying that's not a concern of me just trying to validate a bill of materials. So the second order tooling, the tooling that actually does dereferencing of values and things like that, that's when they take guidance from those secondary validation concerns. So
okay,
we're trying to make sure that we're saying that we'll make sure as IBM, the tool provider, we're trying to make sure the data is accurate, and then if we build additional tooling on top of that, then we'll whatever we choose to dereference, whether it be vulnerabilities or actual package URLs to do these things, then absolutely that onus, but that's not baked into Cyclone. Those things are stuff you do on your own. We just make sure that data is accurate as possible and parsable.
Yeah, completely. Okay. I just wanted to make sure you were aware of this upcoming work, which is really to handle the differencing and validate that these are something that exist. And in an internal use case, maybe it will need adjustment. For an external use case, you want these pearls to reference something that's actually accessible and publicly.
That's the funny part. Goes back to these private packages. So there has to be some understanding that it might not be addressable, because there's this concept of access control that has to be established.
Yeah. I like the idea you were suggesting earlier, both combo of Steve and Matt, which is to have a special URL for repository URL, which would be internal, for instance, which is reserved keyword, which is said in the spec, and which is whenever you publish an SBOM that contains these pearls, then there's no need to resolve it and difference it to public repository because it may not exist there at all.
And I would plead that we would consider explicitly representing GitHub Enterprise by example, if nothing else. But I think GitHub Enterprise or large providers that we know exist, we should include them because that's guidance. Because like people in our spec immediately went to the Perl spec and the RST file that had the list of registered things and said, it's not there. So I think we need to include things that are well.
So it would be interesting then if you have these. Go ahead.
Philippe, excuse me for interrupting. I don't know if the rest of you can tell, but Salve's had his hand up for quite a while.
Oh, I couldn't tell. So one sec, just to finish on that topic, Matt. So if you can share here or in an issue, what are the schemes you use internally that could be interesting for?
Open issue and tag me, and I'll just regurgitate what I referenced, the Debian example and the GitHub example, and say there needs to be one for. I can do that quickly if you open the issue.
Yeah, because the question is, do we need a new type specifically for?
I think it's twofold. You need a general way for doing it, for internal purposes, for things that like Steve's case, and how to represent a non-conventional reference to a package that's proprietary to a company. That's just a general internal reserved thing. But I think that we need to do better. I think that we have to acknowledge GitHub Enterprise and other things are used that are close to what we publish, like GitHub. So
completely.
I think we need that as an explicit thing we consider and we publish guidance on.
Salve?
Yeah, a bunch of comments and maybe a suggestion. So to me, this part of this problem you described sounds like this is partly related to the privacy, the privateness, or how the private packages that are used internally. And there is a GitHub type already, and so why not just refer it to those packages as GitHub type, and then let the access restrictions on that.
I'll comment on the issue, but we looked at that closely. The problem is it's hard-coded to github.com. GitHub Enterprise is IBM, github.ibm.com.
Right. Okay. Fine. So that means repository makes sense to use that as a parameter. Next one, would it make sense to open for adding the authority field to the package URLs? Right now it says that it's explicitly not allowed, saying pkg:// and a host or something. But if you say that there is one such authority that is the publicly available and official one, that is where registered types can be found, and businesses out there can make their own to handle custom exceptions for or local packaging system that they are using internally by just saying that they are the authority for these types of package URLs, and they're not intended for public use at all anyway. So at least that makes it clear from the outset whether or not the package is easily available without having to.
I think I'm violently agreeing with you, but I'm saying it a different way. I'm saying that the authority to me is the first part of the package URL where it says GitHub or it says conduct.
Yeah, so that's the type. That's the type.
If IBM takes ownership, we are the authority. So IBM, I'd love to be able to say IBM : come to us as the authority for everything that follows after this.
Yeah, that's the within the URI spec. I just read it. It's RFC 3986. The path bits are up to whatever is happening in here, and as the Perl spec has it, the stuff that is in the path part of the URI or the URL, we just skip the first slash, and then we decide what is between the slashes, what they mean. And the first one, which you're talking about, is the type. It's talking about a package type.
To me, the schema prefix designates the authority.
So there is an authority section in the URIs, and it identifies which is currently, as the spec goes right now, is said not legal.
To my knowledge,
that
is a schema prefix. That is a schema prefix that defines the domain.
No, it's not the schema. Schema is the PKG column, and then we are saying we do not use an authority, which the authority looks like slash host name, and then a path.
I'm talking about. I was speaking in terms of URIs or URNs, but but I'm saying I agree. The authority is for package URL is PKG, but I'm saying we're creating a secondary, basically schema prefix after that. That's effectively what we're doing.
Okay, so let's make sure we take the discussion offline on the specifics. I mean, I hear your approach would be to include an authority specifically for private packages. I'm more inclined, generally speaking, to avoid to have something more on the left part of the Perl for exception and pushing them to the right. Could we have a scheme to define a type that will be internal, and that's internal -IBM or whatever? That could be an alternative.
That's. I wouldn't that be just say IBM being the authority for IBM package URLs, and the default would be as everybody's writing now, where we don't say an authority, and then we assume it's packageurl.org. But if we add //packageurl.org, it's the default authority, which would be the spec as you have it. And if anybody changes that, they say we're not using the official spec, we're using our extension to it. So if you want to know that, then go to that website there.
So let's make sure we put all that in an issue on how to identify private packages.
And I'm putting the chance. I mean, I'm trying to create alignment between what CycloneDX has in their Cyclone property taxonomy and what we use for Perl. I'd love to have some relationship, or some, at least the approach mirrors each other.
Yeah, completely. I'm with you there. So the last thing I wanted to highlight is also some early discussion I had with a bunch of folks, in particular at FOSDEM, that's related to private package or package which are off registries. And the big problem is C and C++ packages, which just power about still about 80% 80% of the internet.
Oh gosh. Yeah.
And the thing is that yes, there are some package managers like VCPKG and Conan and you could say maybe distros or a package manager in many cases for C++, but it's still a problem. And what I see when you build C++ code at scale and embedded device,
Well, I mean,
is that
yeah, I think that in my mind, for C,
Mhm.
I hate to say this, but it doesn't, the problem is it boils down, not necessarily, the problem is it boils down to include files. It boils down to header files.
Yeah.
And it directly speaks to, you're going to have, every person's build, you have to you need to basically a checksum, a hash or a checksum and in addition to the package, because those include files, it's just interesting because there is no package manager for a lot of C-libs. They're just built as part of a repo, as part of an overall, Clang build process or something.
Yeah,
So,
you have a different-
and it can change on a whim. It can change
So the idea there to try to help would be to build an open community catalog of these packages, just focusing on the package metadata and not being specific to the way you build them, because there's CMake, AutoTools, custom make files, and this and that. There's so you can build that with Bazel on that. There's so many ways these are being built.
Yeah.
And there's no central registry, but just to have a way so we have a canonical Perl, so that when we talk about zlib or CRL or else.
Well, this is interesting to me, and again, CMake was and is definitely on my mind as well.
Yeah.
So it goes back to CycloneDX and goes back to my first tier interest in manufacturing bills and materials, right?
Yep.
So as we're building these private libraries and private packages in C using CMake or whatever, how do I create the dynamic representation for those package URLs? How do I represent those dynamic packages that I'm building in my manufacturing process that may or may not be published as a package, maybe somehow buried in a tar file or something like that or a zip file or something that I push out there? How do I present some a static library, dynamic library put into as part of a manufacturing process? How do I represent that in a transient state?
I had a email thread going between I don't know him, Greg KH over at the Linux Foundation.
Yeah,
on
he's like the top lieutenant, number 2 in command and on the Linux kernel.
Okay, yeah.
I know him very well. He's a great guy.
And that's what we were talking about.
Strong opinions.
Yes. But we had a good, strong email exchange, and I don't know if we have consensus yet, but what it appears as though is that the SWID, along with the subpath in Perl, can in fact be used for component identification for things like vulnerabilities. He brought up a simple use case of a Bluetooth module that was vulnerable in the Linux kernel. And today, right, with CPEs and whatnot, you have to read the description in order to know whether or not you are going to be affected or not. And what we were able to do is use SWID along with the subpath to indicate the exact module that was affected, along obviously with the version, which was the commit hash. So that was the commit hash was basically the version in SWID. And that approach might just work.
Yeah, I agree. I agree, Steve. I think that I'm sorry for cutting you off, but
No.
No, so my use case for C is because I work in AI now, and I daily am concerned with a repo called llama.cpp,
Yeah.
and it has become the ubiquitous C project to get all the utilizable GGUF files for sharing models everywhere.
Mhm.
And if you look at their build process, they use CMake. And what they do is they create, 30 some tools or utilities. And what they do is their process dynamically builds libraries that are either, statically bound to these tools or put as, dynamic libraries that can be used. But again, I think the commit, if you can say, they build every day, sometimes multiple times a day. The only thing you rely upon to basically identify the package is the commit hash. Basically, that's basically it. Steve's right.
Yeah. I think we have a path forward for them. I
Yeah.
think.
So,
And I'll forward you the thread, Philippe.
Yeah, definitely. That'd be super interesting. So there's that. And again, the idea to build this catalog of C, C++ packages, and generally speaking, package that exists in random places. I'm not saying the kernel is a random places. And maybe the kernel is really a unique thing that probably deserves its own Perl. Especially
Maybe.
given its own Perl type, I mean. But for the rest of the C++ code, which historically has been scattered a bit all over, having a place where the community can come and say, hey, this package, we have these versions, and this is where you download it, and that's the license, and that's the Perl. Would go great.
I don't know if we should go out of our way of addressing that level. I think, like I said, I think for things that are, the use cases, create the use cases and see which things rise to the level of needing specific specification or reserve words or whatever. But I think just establishing the patterns and having examples and best practices for these different use cases is sufficient for most of things. But like I said, going back to the GitHub Enterprise things, I think that is so widely used that it needs to be discussed, much like C, and having these like C, build processes and things. But there's a lot of things that could be put on the table as use cases, and I think that just looking at them in a Gestalt manner, and having a process by which we submit these use cases. We have a process by which we say this rises to the level that we need a change in our schema, our syntax, or whatever. Or this is just, we need to create an example. We need to have like a criteria, low, medium, high, or something like that. But I wouldn't go overboard trying to go something in like in a Bluetooth kernel thing. So I think there's a lot of that opens a whole can of worms, because the war for GPUs is taking over, and it's going to become insane. It's going to become completely insane. So if you try to address it with one microkernel or one embedded type of solution, you're gonna regret it, I believe.
Makes sense. Yeah, I've pasted the link to Llama CPP. I'm assuming that's the one you were referring to, right?
Yes.
Yeah. All right, so I think we're at the top of the hour now. So unless there's other topic we want to bring up, that's going to be it for today. Just in recap, on the spec work, slow progress, but some progress. Second, we have a bit of leeway because of the timeline for the Ecma general meeting, which means it's less critical to get everything finished in Q1. And third is the importance of specification, of a structured approach to defining existing and new package type to enforce consistency. So, John, Matt, Steve, Salve, any other stuff you want to bring in?
Good.
Thank you very much,
Thanks.
folks, and have a wonderful day or night wherever you are.
And
Thanks.
happy Valentine's Day. Don't forget.
Yes.
For those who care. For those who
Yes.
care.
That can be casus belli with the the Valentine otherwise.
I'm stopping the recording now.
Cheers.
Hey, thank you. Bye now.